14 days. That was the plan. It lasted 6. In the summer of 1971, 24 ordinary college students walked into the basement of Stanford University's Jordan Hall. They were psychologically healthy, law-abiding, and completely normal. Within days, some of them had broken down in tears. Others had become something far more disturbing. They had become their roles. The Stanford prison experiment was designed by psychologist Philip Zimbardo to answer a deceptively simple question. Does the environment shape behavior, or does character? What it uncovered instead was something far darker. A truth about human beings that most of us would rather not acknowledge. Participants were randomly divided. Half became prisoners, half became guards. The assignment was completely arbitrary, a coin flip. The guards were given uniforms, wooden batons, and mirrored sunglasses. The prisoners were stripped of their names, given numbers, and made to wear degrading smocks. Zimbardo himself assumed the role of prison superintendent. That detail matters, because what happened next, he did not stop. Within the first 24 hours, the guards began to assert control in ways no one had scripted. They woke prisoners at 2 in the morning for arbitrary counts. They forced them to do push-ups. They used humiliation as a tool. And the prisoners, who could have simply quit the study, began to internalize their captivity. They stopped seeing themselves as students playing a role. They began to believe they were actually prisoners. By day 2, a full rebellion broke out. Prisoners barricaded themselves inside their cells. The guards responded with fire extinguishers. The psychological descent was accelerating faster than anyone had anticipated. One prisoner, identified only as prisoner 8612, began exhibiting symptoms of severe emotional distress, uncontrollable crying, fits of rage, and disorganized thinking. Zimbardo's initial reaction was not to remove him from the study. It was to question whether he was faking. That moment, that hesitation, is perhaps the most chilling part of the entire experiment. The scientist had become so absorbed in his role as superintendent that he was failing to see a human being in crisis. It took an outside observer to finally call a halt. Christina Maslach, a psychologist visiting the experiment, was so disturbed by what she witnessed that she confronted Zimbardo directly. She told him what he was running was not a study, it was a horror. They ended the experiment on day 6. The findings swept through the academic world and eventually into the public consciousness. Zimbardo argued the results demonstrated the power of situational forces, that good people, placed in corrupt systems, will often commit acts they would otherwise find unthinkable. It became the foundational argument for understanding abuse in prisons, in war, and in institutions across the world. But the story has a second layer. Decades later, recordings surfaced suggesting that some of the guards had been coached, instructed to be tough, to behave like real prison guards. A researcher named Peter Thibodeau had allegedly encouraged harsher behavior. Some former participants came forward to say parts of the study were less spontaneous than Zimbardo had claimed. So what does that leave us with? A flawed experiment? Yes. Methodologically criticized? Absolutely. And yet, the behaviors that emerged, the breakdown of identity, the willingness to inflict suffering on strangers, the diffusion of moral responsibility, those things were real. The footage is real. The distress is real. The Stanford prison experiment may not be the clean, controlled proof of human darkness that textbooks once presented it as, but strip away the methodology debates, and the question it raises is still sitting there, unanswered, waiting. How much of who you are is actually you? And how much is simply the role you've been given to play?